From the Fantasy Armchair, it is the Fantasy TyRant.
Hey there, fellow fantasy football freaks. Welcome back to Fantasy Armchair. That's right, I'm back out on the road. This time, I'm here at Times Square in New York City, the Big Apple, the city that never sleeps. Perfect, because neither do I, apparently. How can I with all the insanity in the world? And when I try to escape that insanity in fantasy football, I get even more insanity. The injuries have been brutal, I'm right there with you. My team and my legal record looks like Jonestown the morning after. Look it up, kids. But that's why I'm here, hashtag TyRant Gang, to help you all navigate. I'm like a captain. I've even got a hat on. It's not a captain's hat, but styling, because I'm here in New York, right? Yeah. But no matter what hat I'm wearing, I'm still your captain, and I'm going to help you navigate through the tough and bumpy weeks here, right in the middle of the fantasy football season. Right in October, where our fantasy teams look more frightening than the goth neighbor's Halloween display. So that's why I brought an old segment back from the dead. That's right, freaks. You're clamoring and begging and pleading. Finally did it, and I'm bringing back my flagship show. That's right, Benches and Bumps. I freed up what little time I have left in my life just for you guys. So, do me a favor and take a sec to like, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you don't miss any of the best fantasy football content on YouTube. But hey, I ain't gonna waste any more of your time. Let's take a look at the players that you're gonna bump up to your starting lineup and the players that you're gonna leave on your bench. Cause it's time for, sing it with me, Benches and Bumps, Benches and Bumps, Benches and Bumps. And we're gonna start with the running backs. I'm gonna get my beer ready because my running back bump of the week is none other than the man himself, Mr. Bill Krosky. That's right, Bill Krosky, the very same man who taught me to love a woman and scold a child. He once breastfed a flamingo back to health. Hell, I heard he once punched a hole through a cow just to see who was coming up the driveway. He jogs with a refrigerator on his back and he sweats Gatorade. And he once inhaled a seagull and he loves extension cords and hates Mexicans. And he's half Mexican and he hates irony. Oh well, maybe all that's not true and I just got it from the Bill Brasky SNL sketch, but you get the point. We love ourselves some Bill, so here's to him. Now let me tell you some actual facts about Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, the man we call Bill. Despite not always being the lead back on his team, he's the running back 20 overall in standard, running back 25 in PPR. He started off the season by getting 82 yards rushing on only 10 attempts in week 1. Then for some reason the Commanders fucked around with the rotation like they didn't have gold on their hands until week 5 when Bill was unleashed, scoring 27 PPR points on a fairly decent Chargers D, rushing for 111 yards and a touchdown on only 14 attempts, hauling in 2 catches for 39 yards as well. But then last week, he puts up a dud against Chicago, scoring only 5.8 fantasy points. And that made us all say that Bill Krosky is a son of a bitch. But let's look at it a little closer. He played 66% of the snaps and had 17 carries. Both were season highs for 61 yards. But instead of a touchdown, he has a fumble and his day looks like shit. But 17 carries is a sign that they want to feed this kid. And he was still being fed after the fumble. And this week, he's got a juicy matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, who are giving up yards and touchdowns by the bunches to running backs, to the tune of the 4th most fantasy points given up to running backs on the season. In the last 2 games, they made Rico Dowdle and Breece Hall look like superstars. And though the return of Jaden Daniels means that some of those carries are going to go his way, there should be plenty to eat in the fantasy point fiesta that is Dallas. So Bill Krosky better bring his best dinner fork. To Bill Krosky, the best damn running back in the office. Give him a bump up to your starting lineup this week.
Other running backs and bumping up. Quinshon Judkins is a matchup-based flex play with high-end RB2 upside. Start him in good matchups, bench him in bad. This week, he's got the Miami D, who are bottom 5 against the run. At home in the dog pound, win or lose, Judkins is going to pound that rock and wear down the Dolphins D in the canned tuna. Bump him up this week. Jordan Mason is another matchup-based flex option. This week, coming well rested off the bye, he takes on the Eagles D, who can be had on the ground. The Vikings are playing at home, and whether it's J.J. McCarthy or Carson Wentz and his cavalcade of crap under the helm, Jordan Mason is going to get a lot of work to make them look good. Philly currently allows the 8th most fantasy points to opposing rushers, so Mason could flirt with high-end RB2 numbers. Bump him up. Got a sleeper for you. Trevion Henderson is like the hot chick who keeps flirting with you, but then flakes whenever you set up a date. The potential is there. She's so hot. She won't leave you alone, but then just strings you along. It's cruel, but the potential keeps the hope going. Well, this may be a lucky week, fellas. Gibson is hurt, and Stevenson keeps fumbling. It's Hendo time. Plus, it's as great a matchup as you can ask for against the Titans, who are bottom 3 against the run. It's finally gonna happen.
This is it, Beavis. We're finally gonna score. Thank God.
If not, it might be time to consider yourself ghosted.
So now let's go to the other side of the coin where we're talking about who we're going to leave on our pine this week. And my running back bench of the week is Kenneth Walker. It's been so sad to see such a stud running back have to give up so many carries to a lesser running back. Yeah, fuck sad. It's been a megaton fuckload of frustration. I mean, K-Dubs is splitting carries down the middle with the less efficient and less explosive Zach Charbonnet. It makes no sense. But until we see Kenneth Walker getting more carries to Charbs, it's going to be hard to start him on a consistent basis, even as a flex option. And this week, he's got the Texans, who are particularly stout against the run, having kept the likes of Kyron Williams, Travis Etienne, and King Henry to modest production. With all the injuries and buys, you might be forced to start Walker, but I don't like it. If you happen to have options with better lineups and can afford to do it, I'd sit Kenneth Walker on your bench.
Some other RBs I'm benching. Travis Etienne was off to a great start this season, enough to where the Jags felt comfortable trading away his backup, Tank Bigsby. But the last couple of weeks have not been quite so great, carrying the ball only 12 times per contest, his lowest carry rates of the season, and scoring 7.5 fantasy points or less. He ain't losing volume to Tootin, so it's quite a head-scratcher. And this week, the Jags take on the Rams in jolly old England, and the Rams are top 3 versus fantasy rushers. Maybe he bounces back after next week's bye, but this week, you're probably better off leaving Etienne on your bench. Isaiah Pacheco's been awful this season because, well, the Chiefs haven't been giving him enough volume. He's in a similar pickle to Kenneth Walker, but kind of the opposite. Old man Hunt is sticking around despite being awfully inefficient, but the young upstart Pacheco hasn't been much better. The Chiefs need to address their running back position either by the trade deadline or in the offseason. Or, gee, I don't know, pick a fucking running back. Rashard Smith, please? Anyway, the matchup against the Raiders isn't bad, but that doesn't matter. For now, until we see a reason to stop Pacheco, regardless of the matchup, it's better to keep him on your bench. I do think Ashton Genty will be a superstar, but the Raiders' offense is so one-dimensional at this point, especially with Bowers hurt, that I only feel comfortable starting Genty in plus matchups. This week, he's got more of a mediocre matchup against the Chiefs. I'm not saying you sit him, but temper your expectations. The Chiefs have been playing better, and the Raiders may be playing catch-up early, which will hurt Ashton's workload. You're probably still forced to start him, but don't expect the world.
So that's the running backs. Now on to the wide receivers. And my wide receiver bump of the week goes to Davante Adams. Now Adams has been a welcome addition to the Rams receiving corps, especially after Cooper Kupp left. But the aging superstar has only played second fiddle to the spicy young phenom Puka Nacua. But then, Puka Nacua goes down with a foot injury, and he's going to be out a week or two. And while us Puka owners are crying tears into our fantasy god pissed-in cereal, Davante Adams owners can rejoice. Because until Puka comes back, Dadams is the man. That's right, I call him Dadams. What about it? You got a problem? Now, it may only be for 1 week, but this week, they're going to be in jolly old England against the Jags D that's tough against the run, but vulnerable to the pass. Now, normally, I want to get starting players in London games, but they are going to play American football, and Adams is going to be a featured player for the Rams, especially since the Jags are good at the run, and they may be able to contain Kyron Williams. Might actually be a bad game for Kyron, just a warning. Now, all that said, regardless of where the game is, Davante Adams playing with a competent QB against a bottom 8 defense against wide receivers is more than enough reason to give Adams the bump to your starting lineup.
Some other bump-worthy receivers. The Chargers are at home against Indiana Jones and the Colts of Doom. Nah, not that kind of Colt. The 5-1 AFC South leading Colts. And while I've been talking up their vastly underrated defense, the Colts are giving up top 5 numbers to fantasy receivers this season. Kimani Vidal has been my top waiver target these past couple weeks. That's right, I was a week ahead of all those who were fooled by the Haskins hype. Hope you were there with me. But this week, I think you just sit because the Colts are great against the rush. They can score at will, as they have the fewest scoreless possessions in the league this year. As good a defense as they are, they're weaker against the pass. So instead of starting Vidal, I'm starting up Keenan Allen. He's been quiet the last few weeks, but with Quentin Johnson still banged up, regardless of whether or not he plays, Allen could see an increase in targets this week. Lad McConkey's going to get his, but after him, Allen has a good chance of being the next guy. He's still averaging 8.5 targets per game on the season, and if his 3-game touchdown drought comes to an end, he could be a solid wide receiver 2 or flex play this week. Bump him up. Chris Olave has been less disappointing than we figured this season, considering the predictably poor play of the Saints QB Spencer Rattler. Olave is by far the top target on the Saints, averaging over 10 targets per game on the season, and while getting targets from Rattler is like getting tattoos from Michael J. Fox. Olave has managed to haul in some of them and pick up some solid wide receiver 2 or flex numbers, with 0 games under 10 fantasy points on the season. Last week, he had his best game of the season, and this week, he's going against the poorest Chicago Bears pass D, ranking bottom 10 against wide receivers. Olave has only seen the end zone once this season, but that could change this week, as I see him getting around 8 catches for over 100 yards and a touchdown. If you got Olave, give him a bump up this week. This week's sleeper is yet another example of when the other guys zig, the TyRant zags. The other guy said DeMarcado, I told you it was Carter. They said Jennings, I said Bourne. They said Haskins, I said Vidal. See a pattern? And here we go again. They're saying Zay Jones will be the guy if Marv Harrison is out with a concussion this week. But I say it's Michael Wilson. I had him in my top 10 waiver wire list this week. Sign up with me on Patreon to get my weekly top 10 list. The link's down there in the description. Sign up today and let me help you crush your league. Alright, enough of the gratuitous plug. The point is, Wilson knows the offense better than Jones. This week, against the Packers, who are mediocre at best versus the pass, Wilson could put together a juicy stat line. Kinda depends on Murray though. If Kyler Murray sits again, you might sit Wilson if you have better options. But if Murray plays, I think Wilson's a better player for Jones and the better pickup in the long run if Marv misses time. Or if that offense ever gets its shit together.
And now for the benches, and my wide receiver bench of the week is Ted McMillan. Now, as you know, I love me some Ted, and you might not be able to afford to bench him, but this could be a down game for him. The Jets have looked awful, and they're going to be without their star player, Garrett Wilson, this week. So this might be one of those weeks where the Panthers just let Rico Dowdle run it all down their throats, or Chuba Hubbard, or a combination of the two, or whoever's in the backfield. And that alone could be good enough to dominate this game, so they're not going to need to throw that much. I'm not saying Ted's going to shit the bed, but I don't see him having a big week either. There's just not enough volume when they don't need to throw. So if you're loaded at wide receiver and you're not dealing with the bye week blues or injuries, you can probably afford to keep Ted McMillan on the bench.
Yeah, I'm also benching Wan'Dale Robinson this week. Jackson Dart is definitely the QB for the Giants' foreseeable future, and that's a good thing for them. This week, however, not so good. More on Dart later. The Giants are taking on quite possibly the most difficult defense to crack in the NFL, the Denver Broncos. They're the top defense versus opposing receivers in terms of fantasy points per game and have allowed the second least points per game in the NFL. The Giants' offense has been somewhat predictable. Scat is a beast, and everyone else is matchup based. Bad matchup, bad play to start Wan'Dale, so leave Robinson on your bench. We all know that Cooper Kupp will never be the same after leaving the Rams, and yeah, he's been more Pooper Pup than Cooper Kupp this season. I don't care if you don't like it, that's my nickname for him. Fuck off. Last couple of weeks though, he's been flex-worthy, but this week, he's likely to be quiet. The Texans have one of the most stubborn defenses in the league, giving up the fewest points to opponents in the NFL, and are top 3 versus the pass. Even in deep leagues, this week, start other options and leave Pooper Pup in the kennel, I mean, on your bench. Bust alert. Michael Pittman's been the wide receiver choice for Daniel Jones, much to the chagrin of Josh Downs apologists. He's been a top 20 wide receiver this season, and a reliable wide receiver 2 or flex option, at least up until last week against Arizona, where he pissed in your face, catching only 2 balls for 20 yards. And yeah, all wide receivers have off weeks, but I wouldn't expect a bounce back this week. The Chargers have been tough to throw against, and while the Colts' efficient offense could offset that, I would be hesitant to start Pittman this week. I'm not sitting him unless I have comparable wide receiver options with better matchups, but temper your expectations.
On to the QBs, and my QB bump of the week is Caleb Williams. He's basically one more good game away from being a set-it-and-forget-it QB week after week. And I expect him to have another top 10 performance this week, as he's going up against the Saints, who are giving up the second most fantasy points to opposing QBs. Williams has yet to have a game where he's thrown less than 200 yards, and he's thrown 9 touchdowns to only 2 interceptions on the season. Averaging well over 20 fantasy points per game, he's actually the QB4 on the season. So maybe a top 5 QB performance is actually in the cards for him this week. Say what you want about how effective or not effective you think Ben Johnson has been for this offense. I see the difference in the quarterback play with Caleb Williams, i.e. he hasn't sucked a big Black Bear's nutsack this season. So for this week, and probably rest of the season, bump Caleb Williams up to your starting roster and keep him there.
Some other bumps. Matthew Stafford was lined up for a great game last week, but fell short trying to adjust to Puka Nacua being out with a foot injury for half the game. A full week of practice without Puka, and Stafford should adjust. Great timing because this week the Rams faced off against the Jags across the pond. Yeah, it's an early morning game far from home, but the Jags are weak against the pass. And as I said with Devontae Adams, points will need to be scored, and with the Jags D being stout against the run, the Rams might have to resort to a high-flying pass attack in jolly old England. Jacksonville allows the 4th most fantasy points to opposing QBs, so I'm giving Stafford tea and bumpets this week. Sorry, that wasn't funny. You deserve better than that. Jared Goffsome or Jared Goffel? That's been the weekly question, and so far, I've only been wrong once this season, in week 3. And this week, I think Jared is going to be Goffsome. The sun god is blazing, J-Mo broke out, Laporta's having a revival season, and this week, we could see a shootout with the Bucs. All signs point to a big game from Goff, which means he'll probably shit the bed, just to fuck with me. No. Those times are over, damn it. I'm confident in starting Jared Goff this week, I think.
Alright, now let's go to the QB benches, and this week, I'm going with the low-hanging fruit. And no, that's not a new nickname for Trevor Lawrence, but that's who I've got this week as my bench of the week. It's already shaky enough that he's playing on the other side of the world in London in an early morning game, but other than a couple of games, his uninspiring play is totally validating my lack of excitement over him. Now, he hasn't been a dumpster fire by any means, but he's been matchup based at best. But not only is his matchup against the Rams no good, it takes place across the pond. It's early morning for the body clocks of these athletes, and that spells disaster. Now, there's plenty of other good quarterback matchups this week, but not this one. So go with one of those other guys and leave T-Law on your bench.
Other benches here, Kyler Murray's banged up, but if he starts, I'm sitting him. He's been a total bust this season already, and being banged up and going against a stingy Green Bay defense doesn't really make me think he's going to suddenly break out. He has a great matchup against Dallas in Week 9 after the Cardinals bye, and if you want to keep him until then just to see if he can use that game to jumpstart a turnaround for the season, I'm all for it. But if you need to drop him to pick up a more valuable asset for your team, I doubt you'll regret it. Either way, this week, you gotta leave Kyler Murray on your bench. Jackson Dart was on my top 10 waiver wire list this past week, but like Vidal, he's a sit for me this week. He's going against the aforementioned brutal Broncos D, and I'm telling you, these guys are no joke. Dart has a favorable schedule throughout the season, but if you're sitting him in any week this season, this is the week. If he puts together a good outing this Sunday, he's a pure, unsittable stud. I do think he will eventually carry that distinction, but if you could start a QB with a better matchup this week, do so and leave Jackson Dart on your bench.
And finally, let's go with the difficult to fill tight end position, where I'm recommending you give Harold Fannin the bump up this week. David Njoku is the only thing standing in the way of this guy being a stud tight end. And this week, he ain't going to have to deal with Njoku as he's out with a knee injury. The Browns face the Miami Dolphins defense, who's been generous to tight ends. And the tight end position has been the only consistent bright spot for the Browns passing offense. Now, Fannin had some major hype coming into the season, and I thought maybe it would take a year or two for him to come into his own, but he's already doing it, and it's not even halfway through the season. And this week, he's got an opportunity to break out against a team that's given up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Dylan Gabriel looks greener than goose shit out there, but young, inexperienced quarterbacks like to throw to the tight ends. So everything tracks for Fannin to be a top 10 tight end this week. He was my number 2 waiver wire ad earlier this week, so if you were savvy enough to pick him up, give him a bump up to your starting lineup this week.
Some other bumps for you. Dalton Schultz has been all but forgotten as a tight end threat since leaving the Cowboys, but this season, With a lack of pass catchers at the Texans' disposal, we can see a resurgence of Schultz as a viable tight end option in fantasy. Coming off the bye, after 3 straight weeks of 5 receptions and 6 targets, going against a Seahawks D that's susceptible to the tight end position, I could see a bigger than normal game for Schultz. I think he gets his first touchdown of the season on Monday. If you need a fill-in at tight end, give Schultz a bump up this week. Another bump's going to Mason Taylor. Like Harold Fandon, Taylor was a much-hyped rookie tight end coming into the season who's already shown that he's ready for the big league. Even on a Jets team that has the offensive explosiveness of a basket of rabbits. In Week 5, he broke out for 9 catches on 12 targets for 67 yards and a 2-point conversion. Last week, the Jets played an ugly game against the monstrous Denver Broncos team. But this week, things could be a lot different as the Jets host the Carolina Panthers, who give up the second most fantasy points to tight ends on the year. Garrett Wilson's expected to miss this week, so all pass catchers will benefit, including Mason Taylor. This week and next week, the Jets face the 2 most generous teams to tight ends before going on a bye, so if you pick up Taylor, you can start him for the next couple weeks. Hop to it!
Now for the dark side, the benches. And this week, I'm putting the hawk on my pine. As you know, I was big on TJ Hawkinson coming into this season, and while he hasn't been a total bust, he hasn't been a beast either. I think that the inconsistency at QB has been a contributing factor. And as JJ McCarthy gets back on track, avoids injuries, and gels more with the team, I think TJ Hawkinson could have the big season we all thought he would. But this week, against the Phillies D, I don't think a bounce back's in order. Philly can be beaten on the ground and going long, but they're good at covering the middle of the field, and that's where the Hawk does his work. Keep Hawk around for the long run, but for this week, pick up one of those tight end bumps I was talking about earlier and leave Hawkinson on your bench.
Couple more benches. Now you know that I'm bigger on Hunter Henry than most experts, and half the time, he makes me look like a genius for it. The other half the time, not so much. Hard to tell exactly when he's going to be the guy, which is pretty much the MO for the Patriots offense. A mystery. Figuring out the Pats' top target for each game is like a trailer trash princess determining her baby's daddy. You know it's got to be someone in the room, but exactly who is anyone's guess. Without consistency, it's a roll of the dice, and I'm all about skill over gambling, so Hunter Henry is really only usable in plus matchups until we see more consistency, and this week, against the Titans, he's riding the pine. Titans games tend to be slow and trudgy. Not a good game to roll with Hunter Henry, so leave him on your bench. Alright, this one's as simple as it gets. Don't start players against the Broncos. The Giants are playing the Broncos this week. Theo Johnson is on the Giants. You know what to do. Put Theo Johnson on your bench. Yeah, that's literally it. Top 4 team versus tight ends? No thanks. On your bench.
So there it is, fellow fantasy football freaks. Another benches and bumps in the books. How'd you like it? Did you miss it? Did you like it? If you're new to it, did you enjoy it? Let me know. I'm going to do this again next week. And if the numbers are good, I'll continue to do it. But in order to get those numbers to be good, you're going to have to like, subscribe, and share this with everyone you know. Now, I've got some prior obligations this Sunday, so unfortunately I'm not going to be able to do my show. But I promise I'll be here for the Tinker Stinker Power Hour next week and another Benches and Bumps coming at you for Week 8. Good luck this week. Hope you love the return of Benches and Bumps. And I hope it helps you crush your league. Sign up with me on Patreon if you want one-on-one advice and to see my top 10 waiver wire pickups for Week 8. Otherwise, look out for the next episode of Benches and Bumps coming next week. Until then, I'm out. Peace.